of international students, thanks to our government's immigration policies. The number of international students, particularly from China, has gone down by already 20%, and the trend is going to continue. This will cost jobs. The first one university has closed their, I think it's Leicester, but I'm not 100% sure. They have closed their EAP unit or English Language Center. Edinburgh and Bristol have made people redundant. So it is a difficult situation. As far as in-sessional support is concerned, pre-sessional is very lucrative for universities. And very often, English language centers have to fund their in-sessional support. So how they're supporting students who are already enrolled by the money they make with the pre-sessionals. So as you can see, the prospect for in-sessional support is also not very good, with declining numbers. And I think I stop with it on this pessimistic little note to give my colleagues a chance to speak.
So, Dr. Tu, is it more positive in Taiwan?
It's quite the contrary from what happened in the United Kingdom, and because of low birth rate in Taiwan. Taiwan has probably the second lowest the lowest birth rate in Taiwan. So we're facing there are few students born in Taiwan, local students. So government in Taiwan, Ministry of Education in Taiwan are helping university to recruit more international students. So it's quite the contrary from the United Kingdom. So we're busy teaching local student English, and we're busy teaching international student Chinese. So that's why we have more and more students. And so for us, so all the teachers are very busy. So that local teacher has to start to teach EMI courses. And the local student also have to get accustomed to have English taught classes in university. So what I see in our local classroom, our classroom for local students in EMI courses, that students are using AI to do translation immediately, so that they don't have to struggle with the language and they can follow what's going on in the classroom, especially in the professional content classroom. And for the Chinese class for international students, and they're eager to learn too. And teachers are quite busy too. So we're making use of, I think most people are embracing AI to help them to kind of face the overloading teaching job and overloading learning load for the student. I mean, from the both sides of teacher and the students. So it's quite positive in terms of use of AI in Taiwan, as I said in the talk yesterday. I myself actually attended more than 10 workshops this year already. And there, like every day, I got the information, I got the email about more and more AI workshops are happening and inviting people to join online, available to everyone. And the government in Taiwan and the university in Taiwan are all encouraging students and the teacher, especially teacher, to use AI tools. Yeah, that's what happened in Taiwan.
Professor Stockwell, in Japan.
Japan is has an interesting situation in some ways. I mean, there's some similarities with Taiwan. We talk about what they call the shrinking 18-year-old population, and this is because of the same situation of the low birth rates. And many institutions are realizing that it's just not sustainable to continue having tertiary education only with domestic students. So there's larger recruitment of international students. Now, we have a similar situation where we have the international students are coming in to do courses in English, but we have a difference with Taiwan, because with Taiwan you have the language is Chinese, which is spoken broadly. Japanese is spoken in one tiny little island country in one place. And as a result, there's very little motivation for the students to engage in Japanese language studies for their future unless they're going to do something specific to Japan. So once they leave Japan, they don't really have a place to use Japanese language. So a lot of the English language courses are not encouraging the teaching of Japanese language at the same time. So we're having graduates that are coming through the courses who have not really acquired a very high level of Japanese language because they don't really need it. I mean, they're getting a certain amount of that through their everyday existence, but they kind of live in pockets anyway. So we have our domestic students who are doing things mostly in Japanese, although we have some of these domestic students who are also trying to get into the EMI programs, but they're competing with the students from outside who have obviously far higher levels of English. So a lot of the students who are coming in into these EMI courses from within Japan, they're finding they're at a disadvantage linguistically. And they're looking at using tools. So the students are using artificial intelligence tools to try to help them to keep up with the students that have come in from overseas. But the overseas students, they tend to be more comfortable with using generative AI because Japan is extremely conservative in its use of generative AI. Maybe the image of Japan is that it's extremely technologically advanced, and perhaps some of the technologies are, but the views towards technology do tend to be quite surprisingly conservative. So within my own university, I would say that like most of the universities in Japan, they're watching each other's university to see what somebody else is doing first so that they can follow the policy. So they're waiting for somebody to make the first move. So with regards to the use of AI, it's very difficult to have university-wide policies, even more difficult to have national policies. We're really struggling at the moment to see what the location of generative AI is going to be. It's in many ways, it's the elephant in the room. It's something that we all feel we need to be talking about this, but people are struggling to do so. And so they're kind of just keeping an eye on one another at the moment to see who's going to make the first move. So perhaps this is maybe a surprising outcome, that it's not embracing AI to the extent that you would expect. And I would say that possibly there tends to be more of a negative view, or more of a banning of the use of generative AI than there is of embracing it. In saying that, it's changing, but it's resistant to change to a certain extent. So people who come in with a realistic view of what AI can and can't do are very needed in Japan at the moment. But at the moment, we're kind of in a very large state of flux. Okay.
Can I just add a few notes? I think in Taiwan it's different because, as I said when I said in the beginning of my talk, I talked about NVIDIA, and it just happened after it occurred to me that not many of you know what NVIDIA is. Okay, so that's the engine, the producing company of AI engines, H100 servers. That's largely used in the world to boost or to help the computing capacity of the computer. So the Jason Huang. Okay, so I think because everything like AI engine and the chips, TSMC, so it all happens in Taiwan. So that's why I think in Taiwan technology, and that's I think the landmark or the slogan of Taiwan to attract international talent to come to Taiwan. So overall, the atmosphere or the environment in Taiwan is the embracing of the technology. So that's the environment we have in Taiwan currently. So there's a very proud slogan that we're the island of technology. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Wesley, so Hong Kong, what's going to happen in the next 5 years? Big question.
I'd like to know that too. Well, let me first just briefly say thank you to the organizing committee for putting on such a great event and for inviting me to be part of such a distinguished panel. I myself do not feel particularly distinguished. I feel more extinguished, but I'm pleased to be here with you nonetheless. With a measure of cynicism, I'm actually cautiously optimistic about where things are going, and with respect to language education and AI in the Hong Kong context. One of the important things I think for everyone to note is that Hong Kong is all in on internationalization. And in the October 2023 policy address made by the chief executive, he outlined 8 centers that you could really view as being areas of strategic excellence or strategic emphasis for Hong Kong. 7 of the 8 include the word international in the name. And these are actually reflective of the 5-year plan, the national 5-year plan. And so these objectives view Hong Kong as solidifying its role as connecting the world with China and China with the world. And so because of that, I think the government also recognizes the importance and the utility of language proficiency, not only in the English language, but in other languages. And for that reason, it has continued to support, and I would say it's robust support, language education, broadly speaking, through the Teaching Development and Language Enhancement Grant. If I were to tell colleagues in the United States about this program, they would salivate at the thought of having this type of funding available to support language enhancement. And so it's really unique. Hong Kong has also indicated a strong desire to become an innovation and technology hub and to be a leader in AI in particular. There's emphasis on development in this northern technology loop, and there's investment in the development of computing capacity for artificial intelligence. And then, of course, many of our institutions have promoted the embracing or other utilization of AI. And I think over the next 5 years, what we'll find is that we become more comfortable users of AI, we become more competent and confident users of AI, and we figure out how to employ it as a tool to assist us with guiding students to achieve the intended learning outcomes across a wide array of courses. And ultimately, that's what AI is. It's a tool. It is not the end of the language teacher as we know it. It is not the end of education as we know it. It is a tool. And when we ask about technology, there's a question that sometimes arises: what is technology? And there's one definition that essentially says that when something is so ubiquitous that you cease to notice it, it is no longer technology. So we can think about the pencil, which at one time was high tech, or the fountain pen, or the ballpoint pen. These are things that at one time represented significant technological advances. And obviously the argument can be made that artificial intelligence is much, much different, but I don't view it as something that can supplant human intelligence. Rather, it can support and it can augment it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I can agree with you. Hong Kong is still a very attractive place to come to work. If anybody knows people who want to come to Hong Kong or thinking of coming to Hong Kong, it's still a good place to come, I think. Dr. Tu mentioned earlier about students using translation tools. So we're conducting this in English. There could be people in the audience now who don't speak English, but they would be able to understand us through GenAI tools, which can translate simultaneously. Right? It's the here now. But in this situation, it'd be a good thing. But if it's in our language classroom, and we do have that, we have students sitting in our classrooms, and we're teaching English, and they're using translation to translate into their native language. I'm sure it also happens in Chinese. So students, as a non-Chinese speaker or very limited Chinese speaker, I use translation badly to translate into English. So what are the challenges faced by language centers and language teachers in the context regarding GenAI? Who wants to start off?
I think this is one of the key points that links a little bit to what I was referring to yesterday. It's the end of the language teacher. This is based on the premise that technology or communication that takes place through technology is sufficient for all communication events. And I think that this is probably being a little bit overstated or a little bit what can I say, naive on the part of particular administrators that will take that view that technology can replace all communication events. I mean, there are certain types of communication that technology is going to replace. There are certain types of documents. So if I want to read a thesis that's written by somebody in German, now I don't have the need or the time to study German to read this particular thesis. So as a result, I will use translation software to be able to get through this. But at the same time, if I want to have an intimate communication event, a discussion with somebody, then I can't assume that I'm going to be able to put the technology in between at all times. So it depends on the level of the communication that we're referring to. So there are certain types of communication that I believe that translation tools, AI tools will replace. But I think there are other types that we're going to, I've sort of been feeling this for quite some time. I think that we're going to be coming a full circle at some point. This was mentioned actually yesterday as well by one of the opening addresses, that we're moving towards technology, but once we start to see limitations with technology, I feel that for certain, at least this is very interpersonal relationships, that I feel that in order to understand one another better, that we will need to use human language from human to human without an intermediary. And this plays a role at the linguistic level, but it's also at the cultural and the semantic, in all senses of the word, level behind this, not just simply the accurate translation of the words. So our intonation, for example, can carry different meanings depending on how we say something. There's an expression in Japanese we say, "so desu ne," and it's 3 words, but it can have so many different meanings depending on how I say this. Okay? "So desu ne." "So desu ne." Okay? Most of you probably don't speak Japanese, but you can see I'm carrying something different in the way that I've said this. But if I throw this into translation software, which one is it going to throw out? And these are the things that are necessary for human-human communication that I think is going to be difficult, certainly not desirable, to be able to continue that type of communication. I've spoken enough, so I'll shut up.
That's interesting. If you're British, you would understand. I don't mean it in a negative way. Ursula?
Yeah, I'm not in a good position to speak for university language centers in the UK because I'm myself not working in one. So I don't experience the problems, but I've heard a lot at conferences and to my contacts. So the worst difficulty they experience is the policy issue, which I mentioned this morning. So at King's, for instance, many EAP teachers are very open to GenAI, but are not strictly allowed. I mean, many of their students go into departments where GenAI is banned. So what to do? Ban it in the EAP classes as well. So they have this dilemma, even if they themselves favor the use of GenAI tools. So that is one problem. The other problem I could imagine, but I haven't heard it from anybody, is that students themselves might lose some of their motivation to study, to improve their English, because the technology is available to improve their English or produce English for them. So that might be a problem. I can't say any more because I'm not enough of an insider.
Wesley or Dr. Tu, do you want to?
I think one of the biggest problems or challenges that we face is actually existential angst. And that's because we ourselves have not fully come to terms with what the technology can do. And we have a fear of replacement. I don't personally believe that's going to happen, but I do think there are certain use case scenarios in which organizations will seek to leverage the technology to reduce costs. And very often in the terms of higher education, language programs are amongst the first to experience financial reductions. And this is true not only in the local context, but elsewhere. And I think it's one of the reasons why the government commitment to providing robust support for language education is so important, because it says it's a strategic imperative in our context for people to develop language proficiency, but even beyond that, to develop intercultural communicative competence. And I'll totally get a quote wrong, so I'm not even really going to try to paraphrase it, but Wilhelm von Humboldt basically posited that the acquisition of another language does not just represent the acquisition of new ways of saying things, but rather new ways of thinking and doing. And so when we acquire another language, it's not simply that we are learning how to communicate our thoughts in another way. We're actually expanding the ways in which we can think, the possibilities that we can think of. And if we want to be innovators, we have to expand the ways in which we can think. And so I think for that reason, it's going to continue to be important to learn other languages. And I would also suggest that for our students, increasingly, their oral communication skills are becoming important to employers, because AI is really capable at assisting with refining the language in an email, much less so with helping us to have a conversation in the context of a business meeting and to say things that are culturally appropriate and to understand nuance. And so, again, I'm optimistic. I do see some challenges, but I think eventually we'll get to the place where we understand this is a tool. It's a very unique tool. It's a very powerful tool, but it is part of the toolbox. And in the world of instructional design in particular, one of the first questions that you ask is, first, what do learners need to be able to do when they complete this task, this module, this course? And second, what tool is best to help them get there? And AI is not going to be the best tool for everything. It's going to be the best for some things.
Thank you. Let's move on to policies. So Ursula this morning, she was talking about how the university policy often does not align with the department policy, and students are not being asked, and neither are faculty being asked much about the policy. Professor Stockwell, you first. What policies do you think should be implemented to regulate AI use, or does it need policies even?
I think we need policies, but I think we need consistency in policies. And this is one of the biggest problems. It's exactly this point, that the students are in a state of confusion because we have mixed messages. We have administration often making top-down decisions about the way that they believe that AI should be used. But a lot of the decisions about technology, and this is not a new thing, this has been going on for decades, that institutions will often make a decision to introduce a technology without consulting with the people who are using it. So I remember many, many years ago when I was at Griffith University in Australia, the university spent millions of dollars to introduce a language laboratory. And they were very proud of this language laboratory, which they went and showed on their advertising. We have this wonderful language laboratory, but they never consulted with one single language teacher about this. And the result was that 10 years later, the old used or non-used computers were removed and it's turned into a regular classroom. So if we're talking about policy decisions, these need to be made not only at the top level, these need to be made at a level where we have discussions through the different levels so that we can have a consensus before policies are made. But we're seeing policies are jumping the gun. The policies are going ahead of the consensus, and the teachers are then trying to keep up with these, often disagreeing with them because they never had a chance to have their own input into them. So where do these policies come from? They need to be open in discussion first of all. After this open discussion, then it needs to be moving from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top simultaneously until we have something which is consistent.
Yes, communication. If you're in PolyU, we have these lovely new classrooms where we did the parallel sessions, but of course there's only a little narrow strip of whiteboard to write on. Nobody asked us about that, they just built them. That's, yes. Dr. Tu, Taiwan policies for GenAI.
Okay, personally, I'm against any policy, okay, especially the university policy, because when there's a policy or in the level of the university, it turns very conservative and is restricting. So currently there are no government policy or national policy or university policy against the use of AI in Taiwan. But I do respect course policy. So the instructor actually can have their own idea about the use of AI. We always respect the instructor's policy, no matter what policy he might or she might have, because that's his or her classroom, and that's the interaction between the student and the teachers. So that's what I have in mind. And so currently I don't, to my knowledge, there's no policy about the use of AI so far in Taiwan.
Wesley?
So I think it's important that policies be context responsive and flexible and pragmatic. I think it is important for there to be consistency in the sense that students need to have a clear understanding of the policy and how it applies to a specific course and the tasks within that course. But I also think there may be needs for differentiation, even within the same discipline. For example, if we're talking about English language learners, we need to take into consideration the level of language proficiency development of the students. It would be a very different thing to say that AI can be utilized in an English for academic purposes course for students who are who have demonstrated a certain level of proficiency with an HKDSE 5 English language score, and then to be teaching a true zero-level beginner course, 1.1 or lower in an intensive English program for international students who hope to, within a year or two, matriculate into a university. And so for those students, actually, maybe just having a blanket allowance or even some compelling policy to use AI would actually not serve their learning needs. So I think policy needs to be able to respond to the particular needs of context.
Yeah, I think I have said a lot about policies and implementation this morning, so I will be very, very short. I think universities have an obligation to promote the use of GenAI because they have to educate, they have to produce AI literate graduates to prepare them for their professional life. There is no way around it. But when they have favorable policies, they must do much more to educate staff and students, particularly staff. And I think I made that point clear this morning, and enable them to support their students.
Thank you. Okay, a little bit of a different question. So imagine you have a time machine and you're going to transport yourself back to when you were a much younger self, and you're a teacher with some experience, and now you come back to here. What difficulties would you have in the present day, like transporting yourself from that teacher 20, 25 years ago? Who would like to start? Sorry, I mean, for you, 10 years. I was thinking of myself. 30 years ago, I was with the Blackboard, but not Blackboard LMS, but Blackboard I had to write on. And I remember learning to go into the classroom, not with a duster, had to go with a white cloth. I actually wanted to clean the board. So that's it's a technology for Blackboard, but the things you had to bring in. So now I have to come into the classroom remembering all my passwords. I never had to have passwords 25 years ago. Who wants to start?
Shall I kick off? I have very little imagination, so it's a difficult question for me to answer. But what I would find difficult is not only catching up in the technological area, but dealing with today's students. If I made this jump of 25, 35 years or whatever, it's very difficult nowadays, I think, to create interaction and communication among students because they're kind of hooked to their devices. And I observed that in the classroom, and I have learned to deal with this and manage to get them to interact and to communicate. But if I had to make this jump, I think I would be extremely surprised how addicted students are to their devices and prefer the interaction with their device to the interaction with other humans. You obviously haven't observed that.
No,
Very skeptical.
I'm not skeptical, but sometimes I find my students, they're quite, if we get them to do something very communicative and put down your phone, come to the board, talk to each other, they respond positively because they want to do that. They want to get away from their phones. So maybe we should give them more of a chance. Don't use Kahoot, don't use these quizzes. Put down your phones, perhaps. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Well, we are here to answer difficult questions. Well, thank you, Ursula. At least you met the challenge. Okay, another thing we've touched on. Which language skills do you feel students are lacking in today's world? I think we've touched on like speaking skills. Well, can AI help students to improve their speaking skills, or is it only for writing, or what do you think?
I think if we look at the research at the moment, we're seeing most of the research which is being done into writing, because I think this is where most people have the greatest amount of fear of AI replacing the teacher, but it's also where they can see the most possibilities. But I think that this is probably a narrow view. I think we do have the possibility of using AI for teaching speaking, or at least rehearsal for speaking is something that we're seeing more of. Our students who are quite concerned about communicating with somebody in the target language, if they have an opportunity to rehearse in a non-threatening environment. That's all right, I had to watch this as well. I didn't know whether I should swipe it or not. I think that, I've got to go to my train of thought again. If we have the ability to have non-threatening environments where we can rehearse communication before that possible loss of face of speaking with a human interlocutor, then I think that this is a positive. But actually, I remember I asked my students around 20 years ago when I was just 10 years old about what they would like to have as a tool for their language. And a lot of people were really saying what we're seeing these days in the chatbot functions of generative AI. They're looking for an electronic tool that did not judge them, that they could ask questions about without feeling stupid. They could ask about grammatical points which they believed the teacher probably thought that they already knew, and if they felt it's too late now to ask the teacher about this. So we're talking about skills, but I think we're talking about skills in areas because they're obviously related. Our skills are reading, speaking, listening, and writing, but then we have our language areas, which are the vocabulary, the underlying areas, which are the vocabulary, the grammar, the pronunciation, and the cultural knowledge, these other things that are behind this. Now, obviously, we know the difficulties with the cultural aspects, and I saw a very interesting presentation just before this. It talks about the biases, but I'll put this aside for now because I think that this is something that's unavoidable. But there are a lot of things that we can be using these tools for our students to reduce their anxiety before engaging in other types of tasks. And this can be really, I think, any of the 4 skills, but it depends on task design. It's not the technology. As I mentioned yesterday, technology can do anything and it can do nothing. It's really depending on how we design the tasks. But that's our job as teachers to be able to work out how to do the design of the tasks that the students can use for working on these skills. And I'll shut up.
And actually, I'd rather look at what technology cannot do for now, because we're pretty sure that it can help students to learn listening, speaking, writing, and what else? Listening, speaking, reading, in a non-threatening environment, feel more confident to really improve their language skills. But however, the talks or the panels I heard in these 2 days, what technology cannot achieve now is the interpersonal interaction and the cross-cultural communication. But I don't blame technology for not being able to do that. I actually look forward to more work to be done to improve technology so that it can save us some effort to do that in the classroom. And students can actually do more out of classroom with the help of technology to really help them to learn. Yeah, that's what my point of view for the day, for 2 days of talk I've heard. And thanks for organizing the wonderful talk and all the panels. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Shall we go to the floor? Anybody, do we have our dice? Where's our dice? Yes. So if you've got a question, put your hand up and we'll get the dice to you.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on the skill that you forgot, the reading skill. I came from a background of literary analysis, and we do close reading. So from my discipline, reading is not a passive process, but an active engagement to engage critically with the text. And when we engage with close reading, we deliberately slow down and we activate our logical faculties to question the text itself. And it is precisely this skill that I think AI is taking away from our students, because when we use AI tools to aid students in the reading, it reduces reading to a passive summary of the content. It takes away, because the tool can summarize a long body of text within seconds. Right? It changes the pace of reading, and it bypasses that slow thinking critical process. Mm-hmm. And that's very dangerous. And so as an English teacher from a literary analysis background, I'm very reluctant to, let my students use AI to help them summarize tests, and I'm quite concerned about students essentially lose the skill to read actively, and to actively question and critique the tests that they're reading.
Could I maybe add something to that? I think that's a very valid observation. But I think that probably along with this is the need to train our students to see why the use of AI can be possibly detrimental for their reading. Now, I believe that there is a point where this AI can help the students to know whether they need to engage with certain texts. Okay, so if you're looking at academic writing and the students are trying to read long academic texts that they're not familiar with, then having a shortened version which can help them to decide whether to go into this text or not could be a possibility. But as you've mentioned, it comes with risks. There's some interesting research which is coming out that shows that these summaries that are being done by generative AI are not that accurate. And they're often misrepresenting the content of what is actually recorded in the text. So I think you could turn this into a learning opportunity for students to show, well, here is what the text is. Let's get an AI-generated summary and see whether or not it actually reflects the content accurately. And this can be a way of actually training our learners to think more critically about not only what they read, but if we leave them to their own devices, I believe that the students will just simply fall back to the easy way out, which is using generative AI to summarize it. But then to turn that into a learning opportunity, I think is probably something that we could do to show that it can be used for these different skills, including the ones that are, I think, viewed as being passive. I agree, reading is not a passive skill, but our students read passively because they haven't been taught how to read actively. But that's with or without generative AI, it's the same problem. But we need to take that step to move the students into that, and we can use this to show this is how you can engage with the text more actively to understand it more, and to also have greater critical literacy or literacies with regards to how generative AI will present text, which may or may not be an accurate representation of what the original text is. So thank you, I think it's a good point.
Thank you. That reminds me, we had a colleague who was asking her students how they were using AI in a writing assessment. And one of her students came to her and said, well, I used it to summarize the assessment instructions. That's like a reflection on how assessment instructions are so complicated, the student needed to use AI to understand them. I hope it didn't misrepresent them. We've got time for one or maybe two more questions. At the back, did we have a Chinese Yu person wanting to ask? No? Mark? Oh, no. Mark in the middle. Can you give him the dice?
I don't think I need the cube. I got a loud enough voice. Thank you very much. That's one thing I want to talk about. With the advent of AI, I think our students are really afraid to use their voice in a way of context and tone. And that's something that AI can't do. And even if AI produces their speeches, they're still not going to be able to deliver them, taking into account the audience that they're presenting to, the context of which they have to do. And I think language will always be the foundation of language centers, right? English is going to be that language, that foundation for AI. And if we don't train students how to use it effectively, how to grow their vocabulary and their understanding of English language, how are they going to interpret what AI is actually putting out? Whether it be correct or incorrect, whether it fits their purpose or not. Was there a question?
And no question? Well, any more comments or questions? Jay?
Yeah, so are we being a little naive in terms of the future? AI is in its infancy. Robotics is advancing at quite a big pace. Right now, there are people out there who have virtual boyfriends and girlfriends and are quite happy, let alone virtual teachers. So is it possible that actually, quite rapidly, language teachers, students will have choices, right? In terms of who or what they prefer to interact with. And AI is going to be, in some respects, virtually indistinguishable, when you start getting into AGI or LRMs and things like that. So I'm just opening up to you. Do you think that actually, from where we stand now, we're being a little naive about the development of AI and technology and its capabilities and our imagination?
I think that it's an interesting point, and you do have a point. But we'll come back to another issue that was raised by someone else, and that was about the fact that we seem to see, Wesley actually, when we see cuts that are taking place, it's almost always the language courses and the language centers which are seeing the cuts first of all. Certainly in Japan, the concept of language center is usually not positive. And one of the reasons why is because often language teachers are relegated into a center so that they can be given differential wages and differential conditions from the real professors, which I find offensive. Now, at the same time, if we think about which fields that we can replace teachers with AI, I've got a feeling that probably language teachers is one of the last, not one of the first. And yet, administration sees language teachers as first because we've always targeted language teachers first. I think probably virtual presidents might run universities better. So we could probably reach, you can unquote me. Okay, but we can reach a point, I think, that certain courses can be, what can we say, supported through AI instruction. And leaving aside the point about virtual boyfriends and virtual girlfriends, which I think points to a different social phenomenon. However, the fact that language teachers are being targeted earlier on, to me, is something which is more problematic and actually quite discriminatory, that I think we need to be fighting for as well, to show that the complexities of language make our field actually more difficult to replace than many of the other more content-based courses, which, you know, in my own university, I see professors standing up, opening up the textbook and reading it out to the students. Do we need that? Okay, I'm not going to answer. You can leave that to yourself. But what you say is certainly, it's a point. But I think it raises other issues as well. So I'm not saying no, I'm not saying yes, but I think that there's a lot of different things that can be stirred up with this discussion that we probably need to be talking about that make people really uncomfortable.
Yes, thank you. Very short answer.
Very short one. Yeah, I do agree that we're very naive to say what's to come in 5 years, because technology really advances in a very fast speed, changes every day. So like people said this morning, we need to keep on learn and learn and unlearn. I learn and learn myself. So like, okay, I'm not talking about my age. Okay, so we have computer, we have a laptop, we have a desktop, and we have cell phone, and nowadays we have AI. So in my career, throughout some decades, okay, so I've been adjusting and learning new technology and to bring it into my classroom. And I do agree with Glenn that I actually think that language teachers last to be replaced. However, content teacher is in danger.
Thank you very much.